But you know what? What consumers want, they don't want to see your corporate veneer. They're really not interested in having a relationship with a corporate monolith. Right?
So how do you express your flaws?
Well, you want to be human, right? You want to speak like a human, act like a human.
So what would be an example of that?
Well, I think, if you haven't, so when you're listening and you're engaging with consumers, being able to have that dialogue that isn't the two-sentence pat corporate. I'd put a bullet in all of those if I could. And by the way, it's a journey, so my PR people would say, no, the two-sentence PR statement has a role, but, being able to speak like a human would speak. So if someone gives us feedback, there's no recycling at my little league field, and I'd really like recycling there. We could put out the two-sentence statement that says, Coca-Cola's been recycling for a number of years, and it's a blah, blah, blah. Or we could say, hey, Patty, I'm really sorry there's not a recycling unit there. We're going to look into it. But hopefully, based on this, 2-decade journey we've had on recycling, we're really committed to that. We begin a journey based on a passion point that is important to them. These are great stories that we're creating with consumers. This is one of my favorite slides. I call this owned media looking at owned media. It's a little controversial when I call our employees owned media, but the point is, if your employees aren't telling the stories of your brand and company, they should be. They are, in fact, the best storytellers you have. The best, most authentic storytellers are your employees. And so we have to think about everything communicating and the role that it can play in our communications and the way that you're marketing. Why do we do all of this, right? So you've got great branded content and stories that are going out, and you're using it and you're spreading it. Well, obviously it's to create value, and as I said, I have a paid responsibility to create value for my company, but more so now than ever, I think every employee of every company has almost a moral responsibility, a societal responsibility to create value that transcends their company. It is your consumer's expectation, it's your customer's expectation, it's your employee's expectation, it's your shareholders' expectation. All your constituents are expecting you to create a value that transcends your company. 72 hours of content are uploaded to YouTube every minute. So there's no lack of content in the world. And so if we're going to cut through and break through, we better have something that's interesting. So we want it to be deeply connected to our brand, so it's always about the brand, but it's got to be useful or compelling or funny or make you have some sort of emotion so that it is share-worthy. Ultimately, we want it to be shared and passed along. So holding ourselves to really good storytelling, I think, is very important in that. Is that evolution is absolutely mandatory for marketers. Because by definition, the landscape is constantly changing, it's dynamic, and therefore we must change constantly as the landscape changes, as the environment in which we're trying to operate, in which we're trying to create brand love, brand value, and growth for our companies, we must evolve too. So why now? Well, consumer engagement has changed dramatically over time. This is a very simplified chart trying to make the point, but in the 80s, as marketers, we really communicated one way. We had a great message, we put a bunch of money behind it, we sent it out, and it was so. In the 90s, we became a little more inspired and sort of realized that maybe a teen wasn't in fact the same as a mother, and maybe there were different messages we could send, and we started to segment, so that was very exciting. In the early 2000s, with the rise and importance of the internet, we as marketers had to understand and contemplate that consumers expected us to know them on a very individual level, and that we had to deliver on that. So you heard about one-to-one marketing, and we had to put systems and processes in place and people with capabilities in place to do that. The number one thing we try to think about is being share-worthy in everything we do. So, I think being, the principles that I think we've heard across this meeting, being authentic, being transparent, being human, sharing our learnings, sharing failures that are learnings. I absolutely think all those principles apply to how we're can build a personal brand too.